Yo soy Kristina Velfu y en esta ocasión para WARP Talks tengo la fortuna de celebrar o iniciar las celebraciones de un lugar único en el mundo que llega a sus 50 años de edad. Se trata de la Capilla de Rothko, una capilla ecuménica o laica donde se celebra la espiritualidad por sí misma y uno puede encontrarse con el presente. Cuando estás ahí, solo puedes escuchar tu respiración y tu corazón. No se permiten los celulares y hoy por hoy es un lugar que nos encuentra con los valores de la contemporaneidad en pro de los derechos humanos y la diversidad. Vamos a escuchar lo que nos dijo David Leslie, que es su actual director. For the people who don't know anything about Rothko and his artwork in Houston, can you explain us what is the Rothko Chapel?
Yeah, sure. The Rothko Chapel is very, very unique, sacred, spiritual space in Houston that was built in the 1970s, actually 1970, and opened February 26 of 1971. So we're right on the verge of our 50th anniversary. It was designed to be a place for people of varying faith backgrounds and religious traditions, as well as people who have no formal religious tradition, might be considered spiritual, but it could be atheist or agnostic, but a place where they would feel comfortable being in community together, both for meditation, for spiritual growth, development, questing, and also to deal with social issues. The founders, John and Dominique de Menil, were French immigrants that came to the United States during World War II. They were Roman Catholic from their religious practice, but they also were very ecumenical, very open-minded and very broad as they thought about really bringing the people together across all the divides that we have, that we create in our lives, the way that we understand ourselves, which could also be invitation for joining together in conversation, but could also be walls that keep us separated. And what they were really interested in was a place that would be inviting, that would bring people together, but also that would deal with justice. They had a saying that love without justice is incomplete. The other thing I would say that they were really, really after was what role does modern art at the time, so think about 1960s when they were starting to envision this space, but thinking about what does modern art or contemporary art, what role does it play in inviting people to think about spiritual matters, about deep existential questions, things that really matter. Just like the art that you find in cathedrals all over the world, right? In Mexico, to the United States, to Europe, to, where you have a lot of images, right? There's images after image, the Sistine Chapel maybe being an example of that, where the art is there to help draw you into a narrative, but to some extent that narrative is already predetermined, whereas modern art is a way that you minimalize images and you invite people into conversation. So Rothko becomes, for them at the time, the ideal artist to express that invitation for the deep dive into spiritual matters and things that are important.
Oh, wow. In this sense, David, in your opinion, how is the art role in the difficult moments like now?
Yeah, so, I think the way that the Rothko Chapel commission happened with Mark Rothko was an artist who was painting a very, very different style of painting than people oftentimes knew him for, right? So when you think about Mark Rothko as an artist, many people think about the color, the really color form type paintings that he was doing, say in the 50s and into the early 60s. But remember, he's now moved into what they call the dark forms, these really, really deep kind of paintings that are not easy to understand. You have to sit with them for a long time, you know, to go kind of deep, because they're inviting you into this kind of void in a way. But remember, I think that every artist, he or she, they are painting part of what their soul is dealing with, right? The deep questions, the things that they want to articulate. And sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's hope, sometimes it's love, sometimes it's just a frustration with the way the world is. So for us at the chapel, when we think about art, we're also thinking about creativity. And in a way, the well part of it, where the idea come from. So whether it's hip hop, or it's a symphony, or it's a sculpture, right? It is an expression of deep meaning and oftentimes hope and aspiration. So that's how we kind of understand the importance of art at any time, I guess, in human existence. But it's really, really important right now, because I think that so often the things that we are experiencing, we can't necessarily express it with words or the spoken word, or maybe that's just one medium through which we express things. So like at the Rothko Chapel, in addition to the chapel proper, let's say the sanctuary, where you have these wonderful, paintings in the space, out on the plaza is another very important expression of art. It's Barnett Newman, who is another modern artist, contemporary of Mark Rothko, who was a painter, but he also was a sculptor. And on our campus, we have one of his seminal works called The Broken Obelisk, which is a pyramid and then an obelisk turned upside down, inverted, that's broken on the top, which is another way that Barnett, although he never really gave a definitive meaning to what that sculpture is about, we do know it's about transition from life to death, from despair to hope, all playing together in this same work of art. So I think we have that both encapsulated at the chapel as part of the art presentation, and every day as we engage artists and just people that are thinking creatively about the day's needs, we find that art is a really, really important medium through which we express that which really matters.
In your opinion, David, what is the relationship between the art and the spiritual life in the contemporary times?
There was a really interesting article I read about Black Lives Matter here in the United States. And this one series of public demonstrations that incorporated into the demonstration poetry, prayer, spiritual articulation of pain, suffering, and hope. So I think that those two are just so wedded together that you really can't have one without another, so to speak, right? I mean, you think about social movements all over the world, and you think about, this just comes to my mind, right? So this is me, but like I think about those anti-apartheid demonstrations in South Africa that had drumming and dancing as part of that outreach and expression of the need to change. You think about in Europe, banging pots, right? People will come out and they'll bang pots, and suddenly you've got this amazing cacophony of noise and music and articulation of what we hope in our anger. Here in town, it's been murals on walls of George Floyd, who was murdered, back in the spring, which set off a whole nother round of demonstrations and really thinking about racial inequities and interpretation. We have here in Houston a wonderful group of young poets, right? Poet laureate. We have a youth poet laureate and poets that are young people that are writing poems, and we incorporate them into our programming here at the chapel. So I don't know. It just seems to be firing on all fronts right now.
At this time, what activities offer in this difficult time to social distance? What is the activities the Rothko Chapel offer for the people?
Our programming is curated at what we call the intersection of art, spirituality, and human rights. So even during this time of virtual, and all of our programs are virtually offered at the moment, we are trying to stay true to that intersection. So we've had in recent months, and then as we're looking into the first half of 2021, which again, all programs will be virtual, we have meditations that are led by different religious traditions in our city. So we've had Jewish and Buddhist and Muslim and Hindu. And these meditations are designed to help people not only be introduced to the diversity of religious expression, spiritual expression in our city, but also to be opportunities to breathe, to pray, to shut the mind down for a little bit, you know, and kind of practice meditation. So they're designed to help be about, say, soul care, you know what I mean? Soul, you know, the soul, the care of the soul. But then we've had a recent lecture by New York Times columnist Charles Blow, titled, "Is This a Racial Reckoning? Are we living in a time where there might really be an opportunity to recast the narrative about racial relations in the United States? Or will we go through this period and revert to the behaviors that have so harmed people in this country? You know, are we going to seize this moment, or is it going to be a moment that'll flash by and we're back to where we are?" So that's an example of social justice. Next year, as part of our 50th anniversary, we have special concerts being planned. We had to postpone it for a year. We have a commission that's being done in partnership with another organization, a special musical work that will be done in honor of the chapel's 50th anniversary. So again, we're incorporating into our programming spirituality, human rights, and art. It's just, you know, presented in a little different way because we're having to do it virtual, where you can't really have crowds, you know, in the chapel at the moment.
Wow, it's amazing. Thank you, David. What do you think, in this sense, what do you think we'll learn after COVID pandemic? Nothing?
You know, yeah, you know, I hope that it's the same kind of question we've posed to ourselves, I think, after any crisis, right? So, you know, here in Houston in particular, after Hurricane Harvey, which nobody really was exempt from, you know, everybody was impacted either directly or indirectly because they have family, friends, coworkers. But anytime there's a crisis, there is that moment of like coming together where you suddenly have great solidarity. You're sharing something in common. And you always hope that there'll be a legacy that will continue to kind of keep that community connection. Sadly, reality, though, we tend to fracture back apart again. And the hard thing about COVID is that what I don't really understand, and it really frustrates me, is that no one is exempt from COVID-19, let's say the coronavirus, nobody. We're all vulnerable. And yet it's been politicized, particularly in this country, but look, it's been politicized all around the world. And it's become, instead of a moment of solidarity and coming together, maybe we did the first few weeks, but it's become a fractured point where it's dividing people, the mask wearers versus the non-mask wearers. Now we're getting in to those who will take the vaccine and those who will not take the vaccine. So amongst all of that, the Rothko Chapel in particular, we're trying to find ways to tell the truth, to promote science, to promote good health, to keep the message going that you have to always think about more than yourself, because so often this gets very I-oriented instead of we, right? We think about ourselves, me, but I don't think about you. And part of what we've got to do is find ways that we help people to think beyond their own self and think about the needs of their neighbor. And so, I hope that we will find a vaccine, and I hope that we'll also remember that, this is not a time for division. It's a time for really important solidarity. And the other thing I want to add to that is this is really important for the chapel. If we are really thinking about community, we also need to be very aware that some people are more vulnerable than other people. And so often we forget that reality, so there are a lot of frontline workers, there are communities of color, there are people that are really, really high risk that need to be at the front of the line, not the back of the line. And, I think for an organization like ours, we got to always think about what's our part and trying to keep that lifted up in the community,
Yes, you're right. What do you think about the use of cellular phones in art spaces?
It's a very tricky one for, yes, it's
Instagram.
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting dilemma for us at the Rothko. I'll talk to the Rothko Chapel first. That's all I can really be. I can't really tell somebody else what to do. But what we do, when you come into the chapel, there's a sign out by the front door that asks you to turn off your cell phone, refrain from taking pictures. And part of that is an invitation to disconnect, to disengage, to find a moment to sort of or untechnologicalize yourself, to turn off the technology, because that's so much of our lives. And, how do you do that in a way that we live where it's just constant? So it's almost scary for people to suddenly have silence, and not have your phone and your tablet, it's like, but there's something healthy about that. And I'm not just saying that, that's in the medical journals and the psychology journals. Now I want to add this little note. We have people who come in, there's one man in particular who comes into the chapel to meditate almost every afternoon after work. He'll come 200 to 250 times a year. And he will come in and he'll have his phone, and I don't know what's on his phone, and he'll have his earbuds on. So he's clearly listening to something, Or when you come into the chapel, we have holy texts like the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, Buddhist text. So you could pick up a text so you could read it. That was always part of our intention, to introduce people, and give them aids if they wanted it. But some people might have that on their tablet, right? They may have a reading or something they really want to focus on. So we're not anti-technology, but we are trying to say, hey, it's also, and this may be for other institutions, but they got to answer that for themselves. Photography and phones and selfies can be very intrusive to other people, right? Remember I talked a minute ago about differentiating between I and we. So I may want to take a photo, but that may bother my neighbor a lot. So it's one of the things, trying to be sensitive to not only what I want, but thinking about the broader piece. And the nice thing is we have a very nice website that has a whole lot of pictures of the chapel. We have a bookstore, you can buy postcards. So there's other ways that we can offer, at least here, we can get you the photo. It just may be a little different than what you hope for.
This is true. David, finally, I want to know about the history for the artist history. It's true that the Rothko killed himself after paint the chapel?
I think the story of Rothko's life is very complicated, and there have been sometimes a misunderstanding about the relationship of the chapel commission and his life, and then the end of his life. I mean, he did commit suicide in 1970, and he was never able to get to Houston, so he never saw the final product. But when he finished the commission, he also had some very, very, very serious health issues that got to the point where he could no longer paint large form, large canvas paintings anymore. And that was what he was really, really working on. But he lived another 2 to 3 years after the finishing of the commission of the paintings. People don't always realize that. And he went on to continue to paint. He painted a number of works on paper. He brought back some of the color form paintings that people are known, he was known for previously. So I think there was, unfortunately, some people have drawn the conclusion that, those dark paintings must be indicative of a spiritual mental health crisis that led to an act of ending one's own life. And that was not the case, because he continued to paint and continued to work several years after the commission. So I think it would be, it's something we try to make people aware of, that there was a continued body of work that he produced well after the finishing of the commission that we know now as the Rothko Chapel.
Okay, thank you for this answer. What are the needs for conservation this space?
So the conservation needs of the chapel are, at the moment, really fairly minimal, because the space itself is very climatically, I want to say perfect, but I mean, it's very, very good. There was a major conservation restoration of the work of the paintings in 1999. There was some damage and some problems with the painting. And so when we did the restoration of the chapel, we were closed for like 16 months, from March of 2000 until September of 2000. March of 1999 to September 2000. So the paintings were off campus and they were actually stored at art storage. And when they came back, they were in perfect condition. So we have quarterly conservation reviews of the painting and the artwork. So fortunately, the conservation has been very, very systematically tended to, but thankfully we haven't had major issues. About 3-4 years ago, the broken obelisk, Barnett Newman's work, was actually taken off campus, and it went back to the original foundry where it was made in Connecticut, and was actually totally conserved and restored. And so it's in excellent condition also. So.
Thank you, perfect. This is it, David. Do you want to say something more?
I have one more thing. I think it's really important. We have 100 on a year when we're actually open all the time. We're on a limited time ticket basis at the moment. It's free, but it's still very minimal numbers at the moment. But in a regular year, we'll see well over 100,000 visitors a year, and wow, including visitors from over 100 countries around the world. The number one country of visitors that are not from the United States come from Mexico,
Oh,
so
nice.
This relationship between our site, local, but the city of Houston and Mexico is just, it's great. It's fantastic. And I think that one of the things that has been challenging with recent policies is our border policy, our immigration policy. And it's been unfortunate because there's such a, as you know, a symbiotic, such a close relationship between Texas and Mexico and people and families over centuries. And I really value this relationship. We had an opportunity to host a group of faculty members and staff from TEC from Monterrey, from the main campus. I had a chance to speak there a couple of years ago. And really now Tech has a new spiritual site, a new building on campus, a meditation center that we'd like to think, well, we help to contribute a little bit to, you know, in the development. I hope we have more exchanges on that, on art, in music. We've had presenters from Mexico. We hope we can present there. And my hope is that when we're all back able to travel again, we'll just see more and more exchanges. That's just so exciting to me.